The sweltering late June morning of 2022 in Sparks, Nevada began with an unusual silence, a silence that made neighbors hold their breath behind their windows. On the quiet little street that had been peaceful for decades, 4 black federal SUVs suddenly appeared, rolling forward slowly like approaching shadows. No sirens, no lights, just the heavy growl of engines cutting through the desert heat. People peeked through curtains, whispering to each other, "What's going on?" Officers in bulletproof vests moved in formation, eyes sharp and cold, as they circled the yard of an old motel on the corner of Victorian Street. Inside room 12, a gray-haired middle-aged man was folding clothes into a faded backpack, like someone who had rehearsed an escape for years. A knock thundered against the door, firm and final. "Louis Dalton Field, federal agents. We need to talk." The man's breath caught. One fragile moment, as if every secret he'd buried since 1986, suddenly converged on this single point. The cramped room filled with an icy tension so thick you could feel it from the hallway. No one in that small neighborhood knew that the silent arrest that morning would unearth a horrifying truth buried for 36 years. No one knew that the story of a 9-year-old girl who vanished on her way to school, Ashley Monroe, would rise from the darkness and drag the entire Sparks community into the biggest earthquake in the town's history. And no one knew that behind that motel room door was the beginning of Nevada's most painful cold case ever. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys to find forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The morning in Sparks, Nevada opened with the desert's signature light, soft, dry, and spilling over the low beige rooftops, like a thin blanket draped across a still sleepy town. Front lawns sparkled with water from automatic sprinklers, dogs barked in the distance mixed with the rumble of delivery trucks, and the cool early air made the little neighborhood feel more peaceful than any other morning of the week. 9-year-old Ashley Monroe, ponytail neat and pink backpack familiar on her shoulders, stepped out of her house onto the familiar path toward Kate Smith Elementary. It was the same route she walked every day, just a few blocks, close enough for Mom to feel safe letting her walk alone, far enough for Ashley to feel a little grown up. That morning she walked faster than usual, as if afraid of being late, hugging her backpack tight to her body. Mrs. Johnson, the neighbor across the street, was watering plants in her yard, and only caught a 1-second glimpse of Ashley, thinking, "That kid's in a hurry today," before turning back to her hose. At the start of the route, an older boy walking the same direction later remembered seeing Ashley bend down to retie her shoe right at the edge of the irrigation ditch that ran along the subdivision, an ordinary little moment that in his memory suddenly became strangely sharp. When Ashley stood up, a gust from the desert whipped through, flipping some old newspapers on the sidewalk, and she turned to look behind her, as if checking for something. Morning joggers and walkers in the neighborhood also remembered that instant. Ashley's glance backward, not exactly scared, but the instinctive wariness of a child sensing a presence she couldn't name. By mid-morning, when class had settled in, the homeroom teacher called home to ask why Ashley was absent. That simple phone call was the first moment everything veered off its normal track. Laura Monroe, working in Reno, took the call and first thought maybe her daughter had gone to a friend's house or was in the wrong classroom. But when Laura started phoning families in the neighborhood, every answer was the same: "No, I didn't see Ashley this morning." By the time Laura got home, the morning's peace had completely vanished. She ran up and down the streets, calling her daughter's name, checking every lawn, every corner of every yard, every fence Ashley liked to mess around with on her walk. No one had seen her. No one had heard her. No one knew exactly where on that safest of all routes Ashley had disappeared. When Laura's voice started shaking, and her hands could no longer dial steadily, fear became undeniable. When the call finally connected to the Sparks police, Laura leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe, and managed through near sobs, "My daughter, she's missing." The phone rang at the Sparks Police Department desk, and Officer Helen Garvey picked it up out of habit. But within seconds the routine vanished. The woman on the other end was shaking, choking on every word. "My daughter. Ashley. She never came to school. Please help me." The moment Helen heard 9 years old and missing, she escalated the case to top priority. Within 1 minute patrol cars were rolling out, and Helen forwarded every detail to the rapid response team. When police reached the Monroe house, Laura was still standing in the doorway, no longer aware of how long she'd been crying. Officer Ruiz gently asked the basic questions again: what Ashley was wearing, what she was carrying, which route she took. The moment he heard her daily path ran alongside the irrigation ditch, Ruiz classified it as critical. A map of the area was spread across a patrol car hood, and 4 search teams were assigned right there in the front yard. Team 1 swept along the irrigation ditch. The water moved slow and murky, flanked by dry grass and gray-brown dirt. This was the stretch Ashley walked every day, and the easiest place to hide evidence. Calls of her name echoed through the windy midday. Not long after, an officer crouched when he spotted something caught in the grass at the water's edge. A child's white sneaker with pink trim. The laces were tied in a double-loop bow. Even if it might not be Ashley's, the mood around the group instantly darkened. They bagged the shoe by the book and marked the exact spot. Team 2 headed to the small park in the middle of the subdivision, the place kids usually gathered after school. The park was unnaturally quiet. Swings swayed lightly in the breeze. Old wooden benches sat motionless, the jogging path covered in a thin layer of dust. Officers checked every hidden corner behind the slide, every planter, but there was no sign of Ashley. No jacket, no bag, no scrap of paper or struggle marks. Everything was too clean, making her absence even more haunting. Team 3 moved to the ball fields behind the school, another shortcut Ashley sometimes used. The fields were wide, flat, and open. Officers fanned out in a search pattern looking for small shoe prints, but the dry ground and strong wind had erased any chance of tracks. A young officer shook his head and said quietly, "If she came through here this morning, nothing proves it now." Ruiz made a note but didn't stop there. Ashley could have been intercepted before reaching the fields. Team 4 checked the narrow shortcuts between the rows of single-story houses, the routes Ashley took when she wanted to go faster. That's where they found the first important witness, Mrs. Lambert, out walking her dog. When Officer Ruiz asked, she hesitated, then said she had seen Ashley that morning, and saw a tall, thin man in a dark jacket, walking behind her, a few houses back. She didn't get a clear look at his face because he stayed angled toward the ditch, but the image had stuck with her. Ruiz marked the exact spot of the statement on the map, and made it the next priority zone. While police widened the search, news of Ashley's disappearance spread through the neighborhood like electricity. Mothers hanging laundry outside immediately called their kids indoors. A few stores near the school scribbled hasty signs on paper: "Missing child, report sightings immediately." Old folks who usually sat on their porches drinking morning coffee, now just watched the patrol cars go by in silence. In Sparks, kids still walked alone. But that afternoon, not a single child was allowed out of a parent's sight. In front of the Monroe house, a temporary command post went up. Folding tables, radios, a big map with highlighted zones. Search teams returned to report, faces dusty and exhausted but still clinging to thin hope. Helen Garvey was on scene, logging every piece of incoming information. She couldn't shake Laura's words from the phone call, "She's missing." They still echoed in her head. By late afternoon, as the Nevada sun started pouring harsh gold light over the baking sidewalks, the search paused to regroup. No clear evidence, no additional witnesses, no pinpoint on where Ashley vanished, but everyone felt the same thing. This was not a lost child. Something darker had touched this peaceful neighborhood, and as night approached, that fear only grew, covering Sparks like an invisible shadow. The next morning, Sparks lay under a heavy atmosphere. The sky was grayer than usual, the desert sun muted behind thin clouds, as if the whole town was holding its breath. While search teams prepared to resume sweeping the eastern area, Sparks PD received a call from the Truckee Meadows Water Authority. The man's voice on the line was tight, each word slow as if he were afraid to say it. "We found something in the canal. You need to come immediately." Officer Ruiz, the search commander, immediately led a team to the scene. Patrol cars sped off in heavy silence. The Truckee Meadows Canal was only waist-deep on an adult, with a steady but not strong current. This was not a place a child could accidentally fall into without leaving any trace. When Ruiz arrived, 2 water authority workers stood on the bank, faces pale. One pointed to a section of water blocked by a small object. Ruiz leaned over the edge, and with one quick look, stood bolt upright, hand tightening on his gun belt. "Call it in," he said, voice low and weighted with the conclusion he'd just reached. It was Ashley Monroe. Sparks PD immediately sealed off 200 meters of the canal in both directions. Yellow tape went up fast, curious neighbors were pushed back, and the forensics team arrived faster than they had for any case in years. The terrible news spread through the neighborhood faster than anyone could react. Within minutes, residents nearby were quietly standing in their doorways staring out, trying to understand what was happening, but probably everyone already knew. The tragic ending had come too soon. Ashley's body lay on its side, shirt pulled askew, hair wet and floating in the canal water. The first thing investigators noticed was the position of the body relative to the current. The canal flowed west to east, yet the body was caught in a section against the flow, as if someone had placed or pushed it there instead of letting it drift naturally. That detail could not be ignored. When the forensics team moved in, they demanded the scene remain absolutely untouched. The long, frantic red scratches on Ashley's arms showed violent resistance. Bruising on her arms in the shape of grip marks, knees coated with a strange red dirt, not the type found along the canal bank. Those details made Ruiz step aside for a moment to steady himself. This was not an accident. This was not a lost child. Ashley had been attacked somewhere else. Evidence collection was meticulous. They photographed every tiny angle, marked broken grass blades, a tiny scrap of fabric stuck on the bank edge, a faint slide mark, possibly a child's shoe, possibly the perpetrator's. Everything went into sealed evidence bags. No one spoke loudly. Everyone knew this case would haunt Sparks for years. When Ashley's body was lifted from the water, a white sheet was draped over her. A wave of emotion cut through the line of officers like an invisible blade. Some turned away, others bowed their heads, but everyone fell silent. Just one day earlier they had hope. Now hope had turned to ash. The news reached the command post outside the Monroe house. Helen Garvey heard it over the radio and stood frozen for several seconds, unable to believe it. She knew she had to tell Laura. The walk from the patrol car to the front door was only a few dozen steps, but each one felt like lead. Laura Monroe saw Helen coming from a distance. No words were needed. A mother's instinct had already answered. Helen knelt in front of her and said softly, "Laura, we found her." Nothing more. Laura collapsed, her scream of grief tearing through the air. Neighbors rushed over to hold her, but nothing could stop the wave of pain crashing down. Back at the scene, Ruiz stared at the map on the car hood with yesterday's highlighted search zones. Suddenly everything lined up into a clear, terrible logic. Ashley had not been attacked near the canal. The current couldn't explain the red dirt or the extent of the injuries. Even the body's location didn't match the flow. Proof of direct intervention. That meant Ashley was attacked somewhere else. The perpetrator moved the body. The perpetrator knew the area well enough to choose a spot that would look like an accident. As the coroner's van took Ashley away, Sparks fell into a hushed silence. Residents watched without a word, just slight shakes of the head and red-rimmed eyes. The once peaceful town now carried a massive wound. A child robbed of her future, a family shattered, and a killer walking somewhere, invisible, inside this very community. From that moment on, no one saw this as an incident. This was a crime, and the real investigation, dark, mysterious, full of contradictions, had only just begun. The Washoe County morgue was bathed in cold white light. Ashley Monroe's body was wheeled in at noon, fully sealed, after leaving the scene. No one spoke much as Dr. Miriam Hale, the veteran forensic pathologist, entered the room. She paused for a few seconds beside the small body, then pulled on her gloves. "Let's give her dignity," she said softly. The autopsy began with external examination. On Ashley's arms were long bruises, ligature marks around the wrists, and deep scratch marks, clear signs of a struggle. Hale had each area photographed, then immediately focused on the dirt clinging to the knees. Reddish-brown, thick clay, not the grayish sandy soil, mixed with gravel found around the Truckee Meadows Canal. She took samples and placed them in a stainless steel tray. The technician glanced over and whispered, "Not local soil." That was the first finding that confirmed what the investigative team had suspected since the body was recovered. Ashley had not been attacked at the canal. The red dirt was direct evidence that the child had been somewhere else, a completely different geological area, before being dumped into the canal. Examining the airway and lungs, Dr. Hale confirmed the primary cause of death: drowning. The lungs contained fluid consistent with canal water. That meant Ashley was still alive when she was thrown in. No one in the room said a word, but the air grew thick, almost suffocating. Moving deeper into the examination, Dr. Hale discovered signs of sexual assault. She paused for a long moment, her gaze heavy but resolute. "We need full biological collection," she said. The technician prepared sterile vials and collected every trace of fluid and cellular material. The samples containing male DNA were sealed into evidence box M8614, a box no one imagined would become the biggest key decades later. Dr. Hale repeated the familiar rule: store everything. Tech will catch up. The torso and lower extremities showed Ashley had been slammed hard against the ground. Abrasions on the elbows and knees indicated a violent struggle. Most telling of all, one shoe was missing. The remaining shoe had been found yesterday, not far from the canal. This matched the expert analysis. Ashley may have tried to break free from her attacker, and was dragged with enough force to rip the shoe off. Continuing the exam, Dr. Hale checked the stiffened clothing. The fabric carried particles of the same red dirt found on the knees, confirming once again the body had only been dumped in the canal. The victim did not die there. The preliminary report was completed by late afternoon. Officer Ruiz and Helen Garvey were called into the small conference room to hear the results. Dr. Hale presented each finding in a steady but heavy voice. Cause of death: drowning. Sexual assault: yes. DNA collected, male sample, stored M8614. Signs of resistance: severe, continuous. Red soil does not match canal area, confirms existence of a secondary location. Ruiz leaned on the table, silent for several seconds before saying, "We need soil analysis ASAP." He understood the geological value. If they could pinpoint the exact region with that color and composition, they could narrow down where Ashley was attacked, and possibly find more traces of the perpetrator. Helen scribbled notes so fast her hand trembled slightly. She recalled the witness statement: a man walking behind her. Now it was no longer a vague lead. The perpetrator had approached the child, dragged her somewhere else, and may have planned it far more carefully than anyone thought. Dr. Hale continued. Bruising shows she was held tight, probably taken by surprise. This matched the description in the previous part. Ashley had looked back with a wary expression. She may have sensed danger but didn't have time to run. As the meeting ended, Dr. Hale looked Ruiz straight in the eye. Find where that soil came from. Whoever did this stepped in it. He brought it with him. Ruiz nodded, staring down at the sprawling map of Sparks on the table. Red soil wasn't common. South of the city, a few vacant lots near Pyramid Highway, old warehouse districts, and abandoned industrial parcels, all were possible places Ashley had been taken. Before leaving the morgue, Helen whispered, almost to herself, "She fought so hard. Ruiz answered with just one sentence, and because she did, she left us evidence. That evidence, the out-of-place red dirt on a child's knees, opened the door to the next phase of the investigation. The search for the secondary location, where the attacker's secrets were still waiting to be uncovered. Word of the autopsy conclusion spread just hours after the internal briefing. Ashley had been assaulted, fought hard, then thrown into the canal while still alive. The shock turned Sparks into a pressure cooker. A child snatched in broad daylight from a quiet residential neighborhood meant the killer could be living just a few houses away. When fear mixed with rage, the community started looking for a face to blame. By the end of the day, whispers kept circling back to one name: Leroy Sanders. Leroy, 47, mechanic, lived 3 doors down from the Monroes. He often worked on cars in his open garage all morning, and stood outside smoking in the late afternoon. Thin build, gray beard, eyes usually cast downward, he always seemed a little detached from the neighbors. One woman across the street said she'd seen Leroy standing on the corner, staring toward Ashley a few days before she vanished. A little boy said the man stared at kids too long. The stories were scattered and vague, but in the panic, they merged into a terrifying stereotype. The creepy loner lurking around children. Ruiz had to act fast as reports about Leroy poured in. He and another officer knocked on Leroy's door the next morning, just as the press began running stories about the case. Leroy answered wearing an oil-stained shirt, clearly in the middle of working on a pickup. When he heard why the police were there, he stood still for a few seconds, then said, "I knew this was coming." Ruiz asked about the morning Ashley disappeared. Leroy said he left the house at 6:35 a.m., drove to the shop on the outskirts, and clocked in at 7 o'clock. He insisted the time clock and co-workers could confirm it. As for being seen near the Monroe house, he frowned. He'd been working on a neighbor's car, and had walked past a few times. "I don't follow kids," he said, his voice heavy with the realization of how he was being judged. But when reports surfaced about a brown pickup truck, suspicion skyrocketed. A jogger claimed to have seen a brown truck parked near the trees along Ashley's school route the morning she vanished, and the truck was gone by the time he passed again. Leroy owned exactly that kind of vehicle, an old Dodge Ram, earthy brown, parked in front of his garage for years. The news hit the media within hours. Suddenly Sparks was swarming with TV vans, microphones and cameras. Sensational headlines exploded. Child murder suspect may be local mechanic. Brown truck seen near route matches neighbor's vehicle. The community erupted. Some people gathered in front of Leroy's house, pointing, shouting ugly things. A beer can was thrown at his garage door. Kids were forbidden from going near his property. It all happened so fast that police were practically forced to focus everything on investigating Leroy, even though there was still no direct evidence against him. Ruiz ordered every possible verification: travel times, vehicle location, traffic cameras, shop security cameras, shift witnesses. The results stunned Ruiz. Everything confirmed Leroy could not be the perpetrator. The shop's front camera showed Leroy's truck arriving at 7:04 a.m., when Ashley was still near the neighborhood. Traffic cameras caught his license plate, leaving Central Sparks at 6:40 a.m., heading straight to the industrial area. The time clock showed him punching in on time, and 3 co-workers confirmed he worked straight through until noon. What made his alibi ironclad? Leroy had none of the distinctive red dirt found on Ashley. Despite being a mechanic, his shoes and clothes carried only oil dust, no trace of the thick reddish-brown clay Dr. Hale had analyzed. When police officially cleared Leroy as a primary suspect, he barely reacted, just sat down on a metal chair in his garage, arms crossed, breathing heavily. "They already judged me," he said quietly. "Whole neighborhood thinks I did something." Even though police stated clearly he was not involved, the community refused to believe it. The people of Sparks were terrified, and in that terror they clung to anything that felt safe, even if it was wrong. To them Leroy looked odd, lived alone, kept to himself, that made him suspicious. One woman told a TV camera, "I don't buy the alibi. He's hiding something." A man told a reporter, "If it wasn't him, then who?" Monsters don't just appear out of nowhere. For days, Leroy remained a pariah despite zero physical evidence linking him to the crime. As the weekend approached, he kept the garage door closed more often, and rarely went out. One day when Helen stopped by to verify additional details, Leroy stood in the half-open door, and wouldn't open it wider. "Do you think I did it?" he asked, anger mixed with desperation. Helen looked at him for a long moment, and answered honestly, "No, the evidence says you didn't." But that didn't change what the community believed. Ruiz wrote in his internal report, "Leroy Sanders, proven false lead. Community bias influencing perception. No physical evidence connecting him to victim." But the veteran investigator added one more note: this failure made the case darker. If an obvious suspect like Leroy was completely innocent, then who was the real killer? Someone no one looked at twice. Someone calm enough to approach Ashley without raising alarm. 2 days after officially clearing Leroy, Ruiz stared at the Sparks map, and wrote in his investigative log, "The perpetrator may be someone no one suspects. Someone blending into the community." With the first official lead collapsing, the investigation fell into dangerous limbo. The real killer was using every hour to erase his tracks. Leroy Sanders being proven innocent did not ease Sparks. On the contrary, it doubled the fear. People panicked when they realized the real killer was still out there, not the weird guy they could point at, but probably someone more ordinary, more discreet, more dangerous. Overnight, Sparks changed completely. Parents no longer let kids walk to school. Streets that usually rang with children's laughter in the morning fell unnaturally quiet. Houses stayed locked all day, dogs were let out to guard yards, and any unfamiliar car that stopped for more than a minute instantly triggered a call to police. Glendale Elementary, Ashley's school, immediately imposed new rules. Students only entered at exact drop-off times. No walking home alone. Security checked every stranger. The once lively playground now had just a few kids sitting close to teachers, eyes darting as if danger lurked in every shadow. Ruiz and Helen felt the tension in every step they took through the neighborhood. People looked at them with eyes full of both hope and despair, silently asking, "Who is he? Why hasn't he been caught? Are our children safe?" Meanwhile, the investigation showed no clear progress. The red dirt's origin was still unknown. The suspicious brown truck remained unfound. Every clue was vague. And right when Sparks was spiraling into maximum chaos, a new event threw gasoline on the fire: an anonymous letter. 3 days after Leroy was cleared, Laura Monroe found a plain white envelope shoved under her front door. It appeared in the pre-dawn hours. No stamp, no postmark, no one knew where it came from. Just a cheap crumpled envelope. When she opened it, Laura nearly collapsed into a chair. Inside were 3 scrawled lines, the handwriting so distorted it was barely legible, but the words cut like a blade. She saw something. He followed her. He knows you're looking. She called the police trembling. Ruiz and Helen arrived immediately. Ruiz gloved up and lifted the paper. Helen read it and went silent. Both knew if the letter was real, if the killer wrote it. He had just issued a challenge. The letter was sealed and rushed to the Reno lab. Ruiz ordered full analysis: DNA, fingerprints, ink, paper type, handwriting. At the same time, he had cameras installed around the Monroe house in case the sender returned. But the media sniffed it out fast. Within hours, reporters packed the street, broadcasting non-stop. Sensational headlines exploded. Killer sends threatening letter to victim's family. What did Ashley see before she vanished? Community fear spiked again. Many believed the killer was watching the Monroe family, meaning he was still in the area. Sparks grew so quiet that any small noise made adults flinch. Helen read the letter over and over in the office and said, "If it's the killer, he's trying to control the narrative." Ruiz answered more cautiously, "Or someone wants us to think that." 2 days later, the lab called Ruiz late at night. "We have results." Helen raced to the station. Ruiz stood at the analysis table, the enlarged handwriting in front of him. He said straight out, "It's not the killer." The conclusion left them both silent for several seconds. No viable DNA, no fingerprints, cheap common ink, ordinary paper, and most importantly, the writer showed signs of paranoid schizophrenia. Security footage from outside the Monroe house also captured the sender, a middle-aged man with an unsteady gait at 3 a.m. A quick check led to the file of a Reno psychiatric patient who had stopped treatment weeks earlier. The man had a habit of mailing nonsensical notes to random homes. Helen exhaled in exhausted relief. "We just wasted 2 days on an unrelated sick person. Better than a murderer stalking their house," Ruiz said, but his voice was heavy too. When Ruiz informed Laura, she broke down crying, a mix of relief and total depletion. Being plunged into terror and yanked out again felt like being knocked down twice. Yet even after police announced the letter was unrelated, the Sparks community refused to believe it. On television, one resident said, "Nobody writes a letter like that unless they know something." Another told reporters, "Police are covering something up. It can't just be a crazy person." Helen heard those comments on the evening news and whispered, "They're so scared every shadow looks like a monster." Ruiz stood quiet for a moment, then replied, "And the real one is still out there unseen." The anonymous letter became yet another false lead, and the clearest proof that Sparks was trapped in a spiral of chaos, where fear made people believe in things that weren't there, while the real killer remained hidden right among them. After the anonymous letter incident, Sparks practically went into full alert mode. Residents were so terrified that every tiny detail became a clue, and right in the middle of that atmosphere, a new piece of evidence surfaced, this time from a child witness. Tuesday afternoon, a mother brought her daughter to the Sparks PD, saying the girl had something important to tell them. The little girl's name was Kayla. She went to Glendale Elementary, same as Ashley. Kayla sat down in the child interview chair, clutching the hem of her shirt with both hands. "I saw Miss Ashley talking to Mr. Hartley," she whispered, "in the schoolyard, a few weeks ago." That name made Ruiz snap to attention. Charles Hartley, 38, lived alone 3 blocks from the school, worked part-time at an electronics repair shop. No criminal record, but he barely talked to neighbors and always looked a little out of place. Helen gently asked, "Are you sure it was him, sweetie?" Kayla nodded. "He's always standing near the fence looking into the yard." That day Miss Ashley looked scared. Just a few sentences were enough to throw Sparks back into a spiral of suspicion. And things got worse when police went to Hartley's neighborhood and spotted his old brown station wagon, matching almost perfectly the description of the vehicle seen near the route Ashley took to school, the morning she vanished. Old brown wagon, witnesses had said, and Charles Hartley owned exactly that kind of car. Ruiz decided he had to talk to the man immediately. The next morning, Charles opened the door, looking confused but didn't resist when the officers came inside. When Ashley's name came up, he swallowed hard. "I only talked to her once," he said. "She dropped her notebook. I picked it up and handed it back. That's all." Ruiz asked about the morning Ashley disappeared. Charles was quiet for a moment, then answered, "I live alone. I don't remember exactly. I think I was sleeping, or getting ready for work." A weak alibi. Right at the time, a brown wagon was the most wanted vehicle in town. Police asked to search the car. Charles agreed, though he looked tense. Ruiz found no obvious traces, but what kept them watching him was the unverified window of time. And then the bombshell: a child's backpack was found in a dumpster behind the apartment complex where Charles lived. A search volunteer yelled the moment he saw it, "It's Ashley's backpack." Within minutes, patrol cars swarmed the area and sealed it off. Neighbors poured in, whispering, taking photos, filming. The light pink backpack, similar in color to the one Ashley always used, was pulled from the trash, straps torn, worn enough to cause panic. Helen gloved up and placed it into an evidence bag, while outside, the crowd started chanting. He did it. Arrest him. Ruiz glanced at Charles, standing 20 meters away, shaking as neighbors pointed at him. I don't know that bag, he kept repeating. I swear, I don't know. The backpack was rushed to the Reno lab. The wait felt endless. When the report came back, Ruiz read it and closed his eyes for a few seconds. No Ashley's DNA. No items belonging to Ashley. The brand was newer than the model Ashley owned. DNA on the backpack belonged to 2 other little girls who lived in the building across the lot. In other words, the backpack had nothing to do with the case. Helen sighed, another dead end. Ruiz replied, but this time the fallout is worse, because even after the truth came out, the Sparks community refused to believe it. When it was announced the backpack wasn't Ashley's, people lost it. One man told a reporter, it's too much of a coincidence, his car matches. He talked to her. Come on. Another parent, my gut says he's the guy. The police are missing something. For days afterward, Sparks was in full rush to judgment mode. Everyone wanted closure, and believing Hartley was guilty gave them a false sense of safety. Even though there was zero physical evidence tying him to the crime, Hartley's home was vandalized non-stop. Someone threw rocks through his windows. His station wagon got spray painted with the word killer. People even tried the doorknob in the middle of the night. Charles had to call police twice because he feared he'd be attacked. Watching it all, Ruiz couldn't help feeling bitter. When fear takes over, the truth doesn't matter anymore. In a later visit, Helen talked to Charles while he taped cardboard over a broken window. He looked at her with hollow eyes. Do you believe me? Helen answered without hesitation, I believe the evidence. And the evidence says you're innocent. But that couldn't change the fact that the Sparks community had already branded him a monster. People needed someone to blame, and at that moment, Charles Hartley fit their nightmare perfectly. Ruiz wrote in his report, Hartley no evidence linking to victim, community bias escalating. Situation volatile. What he didn't write, but both he and Helen thought, if they didn't find the real perpetrator soon, Sparks could end up hurting even more innocent people. And the real perpetrator, still out there somewhere, silent, watching everything, wasn't leaving a single trace. Finding a child's backpack in the dumpster near Charles Hartley's building, even though it was quickly proven not to be Ashley's, lit Sparks up like gasoline on a fire. People drowning in fear needed something to grab onto, and Charles became the perfect target. Within days, exaggerated stories spread all over Reno. Sparks. He used to hang around the school. He looked at kids weird. He matches the witness description. Fear had crossed the line into hysteria. Pressure on the Washoe County DA's office was crushing. Town halls were packed. Angry email chains never ended. One mother grabbed the mic and screamed, "Don't let another child get hurt." Those images dominated the evening news, creating a wave that forced the authorities to act. And to the community, act meant arrest Charles now. The turning point came when local TV aired Kayla's interview, the little girl who said she saw Charles talking to Ashley in a way that scared her. Even with her face blurred, that trembling child's voice hit viewers straight in the heart. It was no longer just a case, it was the entire town's obsession. 1 week later, in that boiling atmosphere, an arrest warrant for Charles Hartley was signed. The morning he was handcuffed, neighbors crowded in front of the complex. As officers walked him to the car, the crowd jeered and hurled accusations like stones. Charles kept his head down, but his red, swollen eyes showed pure despair. Laura Monroe watched the footage on TV, hands over her face. The pain of losing her daughter hadn't eased, but seeing a suspect arrested made her almost believe it was the guy. She wanted to believe so she could sleep again, even if just for one night. In the months leading up to trial, prosecutors built a story that felt convincing to a terrified town. Charles had no solid alibi. His car matched witness descriptions. He lived alone. He was often seen near the elementary school, and a child witness said Ashley was afraid of him. No fingerprints, no DNA, no physical evidence. But all of that was drowned out by massive community pressure. In court, The prosecution went straight for the emotions. Children don't make up fear. No one shows up near a school that many times by coincidence. This community is waiting for justice. Charles' defense attorney tried to point out that child testimony can be unreliable, that brown station wagons were extremely common, that the backpack was unrelated. But his voice was drowned out by angry glares from the public gallery and the weight of grief hanging over Ashley's family. When Charles took the stand to speak for himself, his voice broke. "I just picked up her notebook and gave it back. I never hurt anyone." Not a single juror's expression changed. The case had been decided long before the trial started. Laura Monroe sat in the front row, hands trembling as she clutched tissues. When the prosecutor delivered his closing line, he was the last person to speak to Ashley. "And now she can't tell us what happened." Laura broke down. She believed it, because what choice did a mother who lost her child have? When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell dead silent, except for Charles's ragged breathing. Guilty. Life imprisonment, no parole. Charles's knees buckled slightly, his empty eyes looking toward Ruiz, who had been called as a witness about the initial investigation. "Detective, please, tell them I didn't do it." Ruiz only lowered his head. He knew the truth. There wasn't a single piece of forensic evidence against Charles, but in the current climate, he was only allowed to present what was in the reports, things the prosecution twisted against the defendant. As Charles was led away, cheers erupted like a victory. The media called it justice for Ashley. But for one person, that trial was anything but just. Tom Reddick, a retired detective who had worked child cases for 20 years, sat in his living room rewatching the entire trial. "This isn't right," he muttered. "No DNA, no shoe prints, no secondary crime scene. Nothing, just a whole town scared out of its mind." Tom understood what Sparks refused to accept. The Ashley Monroe case was not solved, and Charles Hartley, sentenced to life, was very likely just another victim of a system overrun by emotion. In the silence, Tom made a decision. He had to go back through the entire case, because deep down he knew the real killer was still free. After Charles Hartley was sentenced to life, the Ashley Monroe case was officially closed on paper. But in the Sparks PD evidence locker, box M8614, containing the unknown male DNA recovered from Ashley's body, sat untouched on an old wooden shelf, gathering dust, like an object time had simply forgotten. From 1986 through the late 1990s, nobody touched it. Not a single new note was added. Internally, the case was listed as resolved with conviction. But for the Monroe family, the case was never resolved. Laura Monroe tried to convince herself justice had been served, but an empty feeling still hit her every time she looked at her daughter's untouched room. She kept everything exactly as Ashley left it: the pink backpack, the school uniform, even the little shoes she wore the day she vanished. Every item reopened the wound. Her husband Mike coped differently. He believed Charles Hartley's conviction wasn't entirely right. Mike would often drive to the Truckee Meadows Canal and sit for hours watching the water. He couldn't shake the vague feeling something had been missed. That obsession cost him his job, his sleep, and eventually his marriage. In 1993, Laura and Mike separated. Sparks moved into the 90s with a new look, new neighborhoods, bigger schools, busier streets. But Ashley Monroe's name still came up among older parents. "Remember little Ashley, never let your kids walk alone in the morning." In the evidence locker, box M8614 stayed exactly where it was. Everything only changed in 1998, when the department adopted new state DNA storage standards. Every biological sample from the 1980s had to be re-inventoried, recategorized, and entered into the new coding system. The job fell to young techs, people who had no idea they were about to touch one of Nevada's most wrongful cases ever. One crisp fall afternoon, 23-year-old evidence tech Brianna West was handed a carton of old boxes to inventory. When she got to M8614, she froze. The name Ashley Monroe, 1986 sent a chill down her spine. She was born in 1985, but every kid who grew up in Sparks had heard their parents talk about the little girl murdered in 1986. Brianna checked the contents list and noticed something wrong. The 1986 forensic inventory listed cloth fragment with red soil from hem, but that item wasn't in the box. She double-checked, used a flashlight, looked in every corner, gone. She took the discrepancy to the evidence custodian, Jim Larkin, who had worked there nearly 3 decades. Jim frowned at the mismatch. Old files get paperwork errors all the time, but a whole soil sample disappearing, that's not normal. He immediately ordered a full search of the 1986 section. Tex pulled dozens of boxes off shelves, pried open drawers that hadn't moved in years, inspected every tiny evidence bag. No one expected to find anything. Then a voice broke the silence. "Jim, I got something." Inside a nearly rotted box with a faded label, shoved into the darkest back corner of the cabinet, they found a small old-style yellow evidence bag still sealed. On it, in faded handwriting, Ashley M., clothing debris, red soil. Jim stared for several seconds before whispering, "It's been sitting here for 12 years. The seal numbers were cross-checked immediately. Perfect match. The cloth fragment with red dirt, the very evidence that once made Ruiz suspect a second location, had simply been misplaced during old storage moves. Now it was found." Brianna wrote up the report and recommended the sample be sent to the lab for possible analysis with new DNA technology. Jim signed off without hesitation. In what was supposed to be a routine standardization sweep, they had just resurrected the most important piece of evidence in a case everyone thought was closed. Ashley Monroe's name was entered back into the forensic testing queue. Box hash M8614 was resealed with a fresh label. The red soil sample was flagged priority. None of them knew that rediscovering that tiny piece of cloth would lead to a full re-investigation, overturn a finalized conviction, and deliver one of the biggest shocks Nevada and the country had seen in years. In the cold evidence vault, a box forgotten for over a decade suddenly woke up. It had waited long enough, and Ashley's story was about to turn the page. When the red soil sample and all the evidence in box hash M8614 were transferred to the Reno Forensics Lab for testing with next-generation DNA technology, no one at the Sparks Police Department thought they were about to step into an earthquake. Even Brianna, the young technician who had accidentally discovered the long-lost sample, only expected to find additional information. But on the very first DNA run, the lab specialist looked up from the screen, face pale. "Resequenced the sample. It doesn't match the DNA used in the original charges." The head of forensics, Dr. Callahan, personally repeated the process to rule out error. He reviewed the 1986 DNA profile, degraded by old technology, then compared it to the new analysis. This time there was no doubt. The male DNA recovered from Ashley's body was not Charles Hartley's. Callahan immediately called the Sparks Police Department. Ruiz was no longer on the force, but Helen Garvey, now a lieutenant, was the first to hear those words from the other end of the line. "Charles Hartley is biologically innocent." Helen sat silent for several minutes, submerged in the cold feeling she had tried to bury for more than a decade. That same day, the official forensic report was sent to the Washoe County DA's office. The bold line at the bottom of the document cut through the heavy silence of the conference room. "No possibility the convicted suspect, Hartley, is the source of the DNA in evidence." 2 weeks later, a motion for post-conviction relief was filed with the Nevada court on an emergency basis. A special hearing took place in an atmosphere heavy as lead. Charles Hartley, gaunt and far grayer than when he was sentenced, was brought into the courtroom in a prison jumpsuit worn thin at the shoulders. Before him sat the people who once believed he had murdered a little girl. This time, they had to face the fact that they had been wrong. The judge, the same one who had sentenced him 10 years earlier, read the new DNA report, voice catching. There is no evidence at this time that Mr. Hartley was involved in the 1986 Monroe case. And then the words Charles had waited more than a decade to hear were spoken. "Mr. Hartley, you are free to go." In the small courtroom, no one clapped, no one cheered. There was only shock and guilt. Charles could barely stand. His hands shook as he gripped the chair. When he stepped outside the courthouse, the Nevada sunlight was so bright, he had to shield his eyes. Freedom, something he thought he would never touch again, now left him reeling. Reporters swarmed him, firing questions. "Do you forgive the town? Will you see Ashley's family again? Are you going to sue for compensation?" Charles only shook his head and said quietly, "I just want to go somewhere quiet." A little farther away, Laura Monroe stood beside her car. She had been notified in advance, but seeing Charles in the flesh, instead of the rage-filled images from 10 years ago, felt like another hole being carved into her heart. She walked closer, but could only manage a vague, "I don't know what to say." Charles bowed his head slightly. "Me neither." They didn't hug, they didn't shake hands, just two people standing in front of each other, both victims of the same pain, the same mistake, yet neither knew how to touch the truth. A few days later, the story didn't end. When the lab uploaded the DNA from sample hash M8614 to the National CODIS system, they didn't expect much. The 1986 profile might be too degraded. But this time, the surprise came almost instantly. The system pinged a match. It belonged to an unidentified male profile from a different case in California in 1988. 2 years after Ashley was killed, that profile had been entered, but never identified because there had been no matches at the time. Only one line of description: male suspect, sexual assault case, DNA preserved. When Helen and the forensics team received the results, they almost stopped breathing. 2 victims, 2 different states, 2 years apart, identical DNA. Helen reopened Ashley's file for the first time in years. The red dirt cloth, drag marks, signs of sexual assault, everything suddenly matched the pattern of the 1988 California case. Ruiz, though retired, was called in to hear the news. After listening, he said only one thing: "I knew it." At last, after more than a decade, the hunch he once had was proven true. The real killer had never been caught. The DNA match opened a door Nevada didn't want to look through but could no longer avoid. If the same man committed both crimes, there could be many more victims, and he had moved between states without anyone knowing. A new investigation was reopened, this time under federal authority, because of the interstate nature of the DNA hit. The Sparks Police Department conference room was lit late into the night again, as they spread out maps of Nevada, California, and Idaho once more. Red pens began marking repeated routes, seasons, and terrain. For the first time since 1986, the people directly involved in the Ashley Monroe case felt they might finally get close to the truth. And at the end of it all, the DNA in box hash M8614, which had sat silently for 12 years, had shattered a wrongful conviction and launched the hunt for the real killer, a hunt that would shake Sparks, Nevada, and the entire country. After the DNA in box hash M8614 was confirmed to match an unidentified profile from California in 1988, the Ashley Monroe case turned a new page. But it wasn't until 2019, when the Sparks Police Department re-established its cold case unit, that things truly started moving. Detective Maya Hernandez, 34, formerly a crime analyst with Phoenix PD, was chosen to reopen the file. Helen Garvey handed her the newly resealed box hash M8614 and said simply, "We've been on the wrong road too long. Now it's time to find the real one." Maya reviewed everything: forensic reports, crime scene maps, the new DNA results, and the red dirt-stained cloth, the item that once made Ruiz suspect a second location, but had been lost for 12 years. She knew immediately that only genetic genealogy could identify a man who had evaded identification for over 3 decades. She sent the DNA from box hash M8614 to GED Match Pro and Family Tree DNA, requesting the deepest possible analysis, including distant relatives and probable family trees for the perpetrator. Just 3 weeks later, the first results arrived. The system reported distant matches, third, fourth cousins with 2 large families, but one name immediately caught Maya's attention: the Dalton Field family, an extremely rare surname, with fewer than 20 individuals recorded in the U.S. during the 1980s. She expanded the tree. The Dalton Field line split into 3 geographic branches: Oregon, Montana, Nevada, California, 1983, 1990 period. That detail alone sent chills down her spine. Nevada and California were the exact 2 places the perpetrator's DNA had appeared. She narrowed it to Dalton Fields living in Nevada between 1985, 1987. 3 names surfaced: Samuel Dalton Field, born 1928, too old; Benjamin Dalton Field, born 1951, no travel pattern match; Louis Lou Dalton Field, born 1962, perfect timeline fit. Maya pulled Louis' historical residency records. A string of details immediately stood out: temporary stay at a cheap motel in Sparks, worked as an itinerant handyman, constantly changing jobs, once repaired roofs in the area, just a few blocks from Ashley's school route, present in Sparks February, June 1986, vanished completely after June, the exact month Ashley was killed. No tax records, no medical records, no driver's license, no immigration records, no paperwork in any state after 1986. A person cannot disappear that completely, unless they meant to. Maya began building the full Dalton Field family tree to pinpoint the correct DNA branch. She traced birth certificates, marriages, military records, and even old newspaper archives. After nearly 2 months, she confirmed the Nevada branch belonged to Dalton Fields, who had lived on the Oregon-Idaho border, known for seasonal migrant labor. That lifestyle perfectly matched the perpetrator's pattern: moving between Nevada and California, no fixed address, offenses not tied to one area, disappearing immediately after committing the crime. Everything pointed to Louis Dalton Fields' branch. By late spring 2019, Maya had narrowed the suspect list to exactly 2 men in that branch. One had died in 1995 in an accident in Idaho, while the 1988 California case proved the perpetrator was still alive after that date. The remaining name, Louis Lou Dalton Field, born 1962, became suspect number 1. Maya submitted a federal records query: any records for Louis Dalton Field after 1986. The system returned a single line: no records found. It is impossible for someone to vanish from the legal system for over 30 years, unless they were using a false name or died without documentation. Maya kept digging into Louis' last known trace in Sparks. Following motel records, she found a faint handwritten note in the register. Mr. Dalton Field planned to go to California for 2 weeks of work. Date written June 12, 1986. Ashley disappeared June 7, 1986. The matching DNA appeared in the California case in 1988. The timeline was chillingly perfect. Helen held Maya's report, eyes locked on the name Dalton Field. We may have let him walk free for over 3 decades. Maya replied, if he's still alive, he could be anywhere. If he's dead, we have to find the grave. Either way, genealogical DNA will drag him into the light. The entire team immediately forwarded the file to the FBI for a federal manhunt. The genealogical databases kept digging deeper. Dalton Field family branch information was cross-checked against death records, hospitals, employment files, and prison data from 37 states. Nothing. Not a single trace. Louis Dalton Field was as if he had ceased to exist after 1986. To Maya, that wasn't a dead end. It was the signature of someone who knew how to hide. She stood in front of the investigation board, staring at the red lines connecting Sparks to Sacramento, then Fresno, then looping through Nevada, Idaho, the classic travel routes of 1980s Western seasonal workers. "We have the family," Maya whispered. "Now it's time to find the man." And so, more than 33 years after Ashley Monroe was murdered, the name Louis Dalton Field finally stepped out of the darkness, thanks to the DNA molecules he left on a little girl's body. A name that made the entire team realize they were very close to the truth, and the name that would lead them to the biggest shock the Sparks community had ever faced. The paper trail for Louis Dalton Field led nowhere, but for Maya Hernandez, a dead end only meant changing direction. If he disappeared from records in 1986, there were only two possibilities: he was dead, or he was living under another name. She spent weeks re-examining genealogical diagrams, interstate residency data, false identity queries, and finally discovered an anomaly in Arizona labor records. A man named Leon Darter, born 1962, occupation itinerant home repair worker, who had moved constantly between Nevada, California, Arizona for more than 2 decades. The name sounded too close to Dalton Field when you broke it down phonetically. Maya dug deeper. Leon Darter's paperwork began in 1991, suspiciously perfect, the kind of record that can only be built from scratch. No hospital data, no driver's license before 1991, no linked relatives, an identity born out of thin air, a man who traveled the exact route of the perpetrator, and the same age as Louis. Maya no longer had any doubt Leon Darter was Dalton Field. But to prove it, she needed DNA. She couldn't knock on his door and ask for a sample. He wasn't yet an official suspect. She needed a discreet, legal method. Through employment records, Maya learned Leon worked in Phoenix for an apartment maintenance company. His current address was in a cheap transient complex in West Phoenix, the kind of place countless anonymous people drift through. Maya drove to Phoenix one October afternoon. The desert heat was brutal, but her mind was colder and sharper than ever. She surveilled Leon for 2 days. The man was a few centimeters shorter than the old description, hair mostly gray, walked with a slight limp. But the eyes, those dull gray eyes, and the hyper-vigilant way he scanned everything, instantly told Maya she was looking at the survival instincts of someone who had been running for 3 decades. She noticed he bought coffee every morning from a small shop near the complex, drank it in his old pickup, then tossed the cup into a public trash can at the parking lot. That was her opening. On the morning of the 3rd day, after Leon threw away the cup and drove to work, Maya waited 3 minutes, put on gloves, retrieved the cup. Clear lip prints on the rim, teeth marks on the straw, enough saliva for analysis. She sealed the cup in an evidence bag and sent it straight to the FBI lab in Phoenix. 4 days later, Maya was called back to the lab. The technician stood in front of the screen, hands still lightly shaking as he held the results. "We ran the comparison 3 times. Same result every time." Maya took a deep breath. The technician turned the monitor toward her. One line glowed clearly. DNA match 100%. Sample hash M8614. Leon Darter was Louis Dalton Field, and Louis Dalton Field was the man who murdered Ashley Monroe. But there was one thing Maya hadn't expected. During the comparison, the technician discovered another DNA hit, not in the National CODIS system, but in Arizona state crime files. His profile also matches an unidentified sample from a 2004 child sexual assault case. Maya stood frozen for several seconds. He was suspected before. The technician shook his head. No, that case never had enough evidence to arrest anyone. Just DNA from the victim's clothing. Now we know that DNA belonged to Dalton Field. An unidentified killer murdered Ashley in 1986, assaulted another little girl in 2004, and there could be many more victims, no one ever connected. Maya had to notify the team immediately. She called Helen. Before the 3rd ring, Helen picked up. "Maya, any progress?" Maya said only 3 words. "Match." 100%. The line went so quiet Maya could hear the air conditioning in the Sparks office. Then Helen answered, voice low and heavy, we found him. The FBI was mobilized within hours. A federal surveillance order was issued, requiring absolute secrecy until there was enough evidence for an arrest. The Ashley Monroe case was no longer just Sparks' tragedy. It had uncovered a crime map spanning more than 3 decades, crossing multiple states, tied to a man who had been nearly invisible. That night, as Maya drove away from Phoenix, the city lights reflected off her windshield like broken glass. She felt both relief and a chill down her spine. Louis Daltonfield, or Leon Darter, hadn't just killed one little girl in 1986. He had lived like a predator, silent, persistent, patiently waiting for new opportunities. But now, after 33 years on the run, his own DNA had betrayed him. Maya glanced in the rearview mirror, as if looking back at the entire hunt. If everything we've found is correct, she whispered, then this hunt has only just begun. As soon as the DNA results confirmed that Leon Darter was in fact Louis Daltonfield, the FBI and U.S. Marshals immediately placed him on the federal fugitive of interest list. The initial surveillance order turned into an urgent arrest warrant, but at that point, Maya still didn't know that Daltonfield had already sensed something was wrong. 3 days after the lab confirmed a 100% match, Maya and Helen received a text from the federal agent watching the area near his Phoenix home.
He's gone.
Daltonfield never came home after his shift. His pickup was still in the parking lot, but the bed, dresser, and table were untouched. No signs of packing, like he had simply vanished from the life of Leon Darter. A witness at the bus stop 4 blocks away said he saw a gray-haired man with a limp buy a Greyhound ticket heading north early that morning. Maya immediately requested the station's security footage. On the grainy screen, Maya saw the face she'd been tracking for weeks. Daltonfield kept his baseball cap pulled low, a small backpack on his shoulders, boarding the bus like an old drifter. "Damn it," Helen muttered, gripping her bag strap tighter. "He knew we were coming." The FBI laid out the most likely scenario. The survival instincts of a paranoid fugitive had tipped him off. Maybe a strange face near the house, a car parked too long, or just the gut feeling of a man who'd been running for 33 years. The U.S. Marshals took over the hunt. They immediately traced the Greyhound route, Phoenix, Flagstaff, Kingman, Las Vegas, Reno, a perfect path back to Nevada, back to Sparks, back to where it all began. Maya sat in the FBI's temporary command center in Phoenix, eyes glued to the monitors. If he's on that Reno-bound bus, he might be heading back to the scene. Helen nodded slowly. Guys like this always go back, to look, to control the story. The marshals split into teams. One followed the Greyhound to Flagstaff, another waited in Kingman, a third staked out Las Vegas. Sparks PD beefed up presence in Reno. That night, the Greyhound rolled through the Arizona desert. In Flagstaff, marshals checked. Daltonfield hadn't gotten off. That meant he was still on board, heading to Kingman, the next major stop. Just before dawn, under the dim lights of the Kingman bus depot, marshals dressed as passengers and janitors waited. When the bus pulled in, they stood still, watching the door. The driver stepped off, yawning. Passengers trickled out, a woman with a small child, a young guy with a heavy backpack, a drunk old man. Then a man in a gray baseball cap stepped down slowly, limping slightly. His eyes darted around, defensive, alert, the exact same look Maya had seen in Phoenix. Target confirmed, Marshal O'Keefe whispered into his radio. Proceed. 2 marshals closed in from opposite sides. One called out, Leon Darter, federal officers, hands where we can see them. Daltonfield flinched, took half a step back, then spun to bolt behind the station. But he couldn't run fast. The old knee injury always left him limping. Seconds later he was slammed onto the concrete. He roared like a cornered animal. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. But when the marshals searched him, one item stopped them cold. A small old folded Nevada map with a faded red circle around Ashley Monroe's route to school. Not a new map, not something printed recently. A map from the 1980s, yellowed with age, the red pen mark half faded, something only the person tied to the crime would carry for 33 years. When Maya got the text, "We got him," she was in the FBI's Phoenix office. She shot to her feet, nearly dropping her phone. In the back of the marshal's SUV on the way to the Kingman police station, Dalton Field stayed silent. Only when a marshal mentioned Sparks did he let out a dry, rasping laugh. "I knew I'd end up back there." "Back for what?" the marshal asked. Dalton Field tilted his head, a crooked smile like an old scar. "To see if anyone still remembered the little girl." That sentence silenced the entire vehicle. At Kingman PD, going through his backpack, they found more. An old switchblade, 2 tattered notebooks, a stack of newspaper clippings about Sparks from 1986, 3 Greyhound tickets from Phoenix to Reno from different years. He'd gone back to Sparks multiple times, quietly, without anyone knowing. Standing outside the interrogation room, Maya looked through the two-way glass at the man she'd chased for months, sitting motionless, eyes still dodging like a wild animal that had lived too long in the dark. "This isn't the end," Helen said beside her. Maya nodded slightly. "No, this is just when he finally has to face it." Louis Dalton Field, the man who'd run for 33 years, was finally caught in the Arizona desert, in a town he never expected. But the secrets he carried were still locked away. When he was brought into Kingman PD, Louis Dalton Field sat motionless in the interrogation room, hands cuffed in front of him, eyes dull as if trying to decide whether to play innocent or a man who'd already surrendered to fate. Maya Hernandez stood behind the two-way mirror with Helen Garvey and Marshall O'Keefe, all watching how he reacted to the cold air of the room. Dalton Field didn't look up when Maya walked in. She set the case file on the table, gentle but firm. He glanced at it, then away, voice hoarse from a dry throat. "I didn't do what you think. You know what we found in your bag," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "The Nevada map, Ashley's school route circled in red, bus tickets back to Sparks over the years." Dalton Field gave a short, cracked laugh like breaking stone. "I was just curious. Curious about a little girl who died in 1986. Maya asked, eyes locked on him. He went quiet. After 10 minutes of dodging, Dalton Field started spinning his own version of the truth. A loose story full of holes, but one he thought sounded clever enough to pass. "I just saw her that day," he said, breathing fast. "I was fixing a fence by the East Canal. She walked past. I never touched her." "You were fixing a fence," Maya repeated, "in the exact area where we found red dirt on the victim." Dalton Field clenched his fists. The cuffs clinked softly. "That dirt's all over that area. Doesn't prove anything." Maya didn't answer. Instead she opened the file and slid a page across microscope photos of the red dirt from Ashley's knees, plus the geological analysis matching the exact yard where Dalton Field worked in June 1986. "This isn't just any red dirt," Maya said. "It has a unique weathered river sediment mix, only found in the spot where you worked, a tiny area, over a mile from where Ashley was found." Dalton Field swallowed hard. "Still doesn't prove I touched the kid." Maya glanced at the next file. "What about the DNA under her fingernails?" Dalton Field's head snapped up, eyes wild like the moment he was tackled in Kingman, a cornered animal. "She fought back," Maya said, each word slow and clear. "And your DNA was in the scratches." He shook his head hard, the chair creaking under him. "No, I didn't do that. I didn't touch her like you're saying." "You sexually assaulted her," Maya said flatly, "and forensics proved it." "No," he shouted. "I didn't. I'm not that kind of guy." Helen Garvey walked in then, dropping a stack of forensic photos on the table. "Want to see the evidence?" Dalton Field slammed his cuffed hands on the table. "I didn't do that to her." Helen stared straight into his eyes. "You killed her. Drowned her. You know it." A minute of silence stretched like a wire. Then Dalton Field let out a long breath, eyes closing. "That day," she screamed. That sentence shattered the room's silence. Maya leaned forward slightly, waiting. Dalton Field slowly opened his eyes, as if dragging up a memory buried for 33 years. "I didn't mean to do anything," She just looked at me. She ran. I grabbed her arm to stop her. He clenched his fist like he could still feel the grip. Then she screamed, really loud. His hand started shaking. Sparks was quiet back then. I panicked. Helen asked, "What did you do?" Dalton Field stared at the table, voice lower, thicker. "I lost control." Those 4 words made Maya's spine go cold. The phrase countless child predators have used. The phrase of men who never admit the full crime. Dalton Field went on, voice trembling like it might break. "I threw her to the ground. She scratched me. It hurt bad. I was bleeding. I just wanted her to shut up." "Where did you take her?" Maya asked. Dalton Field squeezed his eyes shut. "The red dirt lot, where I worked, where no one would hear her." Maya said nothing more. Everything was already proven by forensics. Now they just needed him to say it. Dalton Field gave a weak, crooked smile. "I'm not a monster. You are a monster." Helen said coldly, "And you just helped us prove it." She closed the file with a loud snap, like shutting a coffin lid. The red dirt, DNA under her nails, DNA inside her, your bus trips, the map of Ashley in your pocket, tickets back to Sparks for years. Maya continued, "You didn't just kill her. You carried that memory for 33 years, like a trophy." Dalton Field's face went pale. "The only question left," Maya said, "is how many other kids screamed, and you lost control." Dalton Field didn't answer. In that moment, his silence said what he wouldn't admit. It wasn't the only time. And Louis Dalton Field's half-confession was enough to convict him, and open the door to far darker secrets he'd carried for 3 decades. The 2022 trial of Louis Lou Dalton Field in Washoe County quickly became Nevada's media firestorm. After more than 3 decades, justice for Ashley Monroe, the 9-year-old murdered in 1986, finally had a chance to be named. Courtroom 4 was packed on the first day. Laura Monroe sat in the front row clutching tissues, while Maya Hernandez and Helen Garvey sat behind the prosecution table, ready for the moment they'd chased for years. Dalton Field was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, head down, but his dull gray eyes still carried the wariness of a man used to living in the shadows. Lead prosecutor Evelyn Marks opened with a 3D presentation, the first time the technology had ever been used in a Washoe County courtroom. The big screen showed Ashley's walk on the morning of June 7, 1986, leaving home with her pink backpack, greeting a neighbor at Maple Street, stopping to tie her shoe near the irrigation canal, a male figure walking behind her, reconstructed from old witness statements. Ashley pulled off her usual route, toward the red dirt lot where Dalton Field worked. The model showed morning sunlight, shadows, traffic patterns, all recreated from 1986 data. When the animation showed Ashley being forced off her path, the courtroom went dead silent. Mark said, "This is the only route that connects victim and defendant, and every detail lines up perfectly with Dalton Field being in Sparks that day." The prosecution called its first witness, Kayla, the little girl who once said she saw Ashley talking to a man, now 45. Kayla's voice shook. "That day, Ashley looked scared of him. I just remember those eyes." Defense objected to childhood memory reliability, but Marks showed the 1986 age-progressed sketch, based on Kayla's description, compared side by side with young Dalton Field photos, matching height, slight limp, gray baseball cap. Another witness, a jogger from 1986, testified, "I remember the girl looking back. She was scared." Memories 36 years old, now re-examined under modern light. Maya took the stand carrying the red dirt samples she'd recovered from storage after more than a decade missing. "This is dirt taken from the victim's knees and clothing," Maya said, "and this is dirt from the construction yard where Dalton Field worked in 1986. On screen, the sample zoomed in. Distinctive orange-red color, rare mineral composition, identical weathering. There is only one place in all of Sparks with this dirt," Maya concluded. "Not where the body was found, but where the victim was attacked before being moved to the canal." Defense counsel fell silent. You can't argue with geology. The DNA expert followed. DNA from inside Ashley. DNA under the victim's fingernails. DNA on fabric stuck in the red dirt. DNA from Dalton Field's coffee cup and Phoenix. All perfect matches. Defense offered weakly. Could have been incidental contact. Marks fired back. DNA under the fingernails shows the victim scratched her attacker while fighting for her life. That is not incidental contact. Photos of human skin under Ashley's nails made people in the gallery choke up. She screamed, "I lost control." The recording that ended Dalton Field prosecution played the Kingman interrogation tape. His trembling voice, she screamed, "I lost control." In the courtroom, sobbing rose from the back rows. Laura Monroe bowed her head, hands over her mouth. Marks looked straight at the jury. He says he lost control, but he kept Ashley's route map for 33 years. He returned to Sparks repeatedly. He followed the case. That's not losing control. That's obsession. Dalton Field kept his head down. No rebuttal. The jury went to deliberate. Everyone expected days. They returned in under 3 hours. The 4 persons stood. We find the defendant Louis Dalton Field guilty of murder in the first degree, kidnapping, sexual assault, all counts guilty. Dalton Field closed his eyes while Laura broke down, for the first time in 36 years feeling the weight lift from her heart. The judge sentenced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Everyone present knew the trial was over, but its aftershocks, the unanswered questions and the secrets Dalton Field still carried, remained. And Sparks, Nevada was about to face a far more painful truth. Ashley might not have been the only victim. Right after the life sentence without parole for Louis Lou Dalton Field was handed down, the Washoe County courtroom fell so silent it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. But for Laura Monroe, that moment wasn't just the triumph of justice, it was the collision of 3 opposing emotions: relief, torment, and regret. 3 feelings she had tried to bury for 36 years and never quite managed to. Laura left the courtroom, her hands trembling as she gripped the hallway railing. People came up to hug her, the prosecutor, the investigators, parents who had prayed with her family 3 decades earlier. But all those words of comfort were just a thin mist that couldn't hide the brutal truth she now faced. She had once believed an innocent man was her daughter's killer. That afternoon, in the quiet meeting room of the Sparks Community Center where police were holding the press conference, someone unexpected walked in, and every eye turned. Charles Hartley. Charles, the man who had once been arrested, tried, sentenced to life, and imprisoned for more than 14 years before DNA proved his innocence, now stood before the community, with far more gray hair and eyes, dulled like someone who had lived too long in the dark. No one spoke, no one even breathed loudly. Laura stood up, but didn't walk toward him. Charles looked at her. There was no longer the anger in his eyes that had been there in the early days after his release, only the calm of a man who had taught himself acceptance. "I don't blame you, Laura. You were just a mother who lost her child. Anyone in that position would want to believe someone had to pay." His voice was hoarse but steady. "I lost 14 years, but I'm still alive to prove I didn't do it." "Your little girl isn't," Laura cried, not for the injustice done to him, but for herself. For years she had looked at Charles's picture in the papers and silently thought, he deserves it. Now, standing face to face with him, she saw only a human being crushed by the mistakes of an entire system. Laura stepped forward and said through broken breaths, "I'm sorry." Charles shook his head. "No, the people who need to apologize to me have been dead a long time, the 1986 investigation team, not you." The next day, the name Dalton Field was plastered across every Nevada newspaper and led every evening newscast. But the story wasn't just about a criminal finally convicted after 36 years. What shook Sparks and Reno was the chain of systemic failures laid bare. Child witnesses led by suggestive questioning, a child's backpack found near Charles's house, hyped by the media as golden evidence, even though it wasn't Ashley's. Public pressure that pushed the old investigation team into a rush, and most damning, the red soil sample, the key evidence that had been lost for nearly a decade. At the press conference, a Reno Gazette-Journal reporter asked the former lead investigator directly, "Do you think if procedures had been stricter Ashley would have been found sooner, and Charles wouldn't have spent years in prison for nothing?" The old lead investigator, hair now completely white, couldn't answer. He only said, "We did the best we could, with what we had." But everyone in the room knew, in 1986, the Sparks police weren't incompetent. They were just trapped in the belief that the perpetrator has to be someone familiar, and from that point let clues pointing to a stranger slip away. Sparks, a community that had always thought of itself as peaceful, now had to face the reality. They had once put an innocent man in prison and let the real monster walk free from the shadows. That night, in the living room where a photo of Ashley, in a green dress from 1985 still hung, Laura sat alone with the wooden box of her daughter's keepsakes. The movie ticket Ashley had begged to use, the little snow globe she loved to watch before falling asleep, the pink hair tie, and a folded note Laura had never found the courage to open since 1986. A note in her daughter's own handwriting. "Mom, I'll try to come home early today." Laura sobbed uncontrollably. For 36 years she had lived believing she had fought for her daughter. But today she understood, in trying to protect Ashley's memory, she had unknowingly trampled another person's life. Justice for Ashley had arrived, but justice for the truth had broken a mother's heart one more time. After the Dalton Field verdict, every missing child case file in Nevada from the late 1980s was pulled for review. People began to ask, did Dalton Field have other victims? Had Reno parents back then lived next door to a child predator without knowing it? Had the 1986 Sparks police overlooked critical witness statements? And the biggest question of all, what would have happened if DNA testing had been done sooner? If 3D reconstruction and genetic genealogy had existed in the 1980s? Sparks, the small city in the middle of the Nevada desert, understands this better than anyone. Justice always exists, but it doesn't always arrive on time. That night, Laura stood on her porch, looking at the distant glow of Reno's lights, and thought, Ashley has been set free. But the truth, no one really escapes it, and the Sparks community knew this story didn't end with a verdict. It is a scar that can never be erased, reminding them that for 36 years the truth had been buried, not underground, but inside human prejudice itself. 3 months after the trial ended, Sparks and Reno entered a new chapter, no longer the bitter silence of more than 3 decades, but a powerful shift to ensure Ashley Monroe's tragedy would never be repeated. The story of the 9-year-old girl became the catalyst for sweeping changes in how Nevada handles, processes and preserves unsolved missing and murdered children cases. Immediately after the Dalton Field verdict, the governor of Nevada signed an executive order, creating the Nevada Child Cold Case Initiative, a program dedicated to re-examining every unresolved case of a missing or murdered child from 1950 to 2005. Sparks PD, Reno PD, the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI all joined directly. In the first 2 months, 84 cases were reopened. 17 old DNA samples were retested with new technology. 4 cases showed signs of progress for the first time in decades. A state legislator said, "We can't fix the past, but we can honor Ashley by making sure no child is ever forgotten again." The official report for the program states, "Established in memory of Ashley Monroe." Detective Maya Hernandez, the investigator who unlocked evidence box hash M8614 and brought Ashley's case back to life, became a name the entire state recognized. She organized the largest training workshops Nevada had ever seen on modern investigation techniques, using genetic genealogy DNA, 3D crime scene reconstruction, handling degraded evidence, properly interviewing child witnesses. Not only Nevada officers attended, departments from California, Utah, and Arizona sent people too. One young officer said, Maya taught us that technology isn't just a tool, it's a chance to redeem the mistakes of the past. On August 12, 2022, the small park near the Truckee Meadows Canal was renamed Ashley Monroe Reflection Garden. At the ceremony, Laura Monroe stood in front of a stone marker engraved with the words, "For every child who never made it home." In the eastern corner of the garden is a wooden bench, placed exactly where the last witness saw Ashley bend down to tie her shoe in 1986. A little girl laid white daisies at the memorial and asked her mother, "Was this girl walking to school just like me?" The mother nodded and held her daughter's hand tighter. In that moment, sparks went quiet, not out of fear, but out of gratitude and understanding. Right after the verdict, Maya's inbox overflowed with messages from across Nevada. "A family in Elko, our daughter vanished in 1993. If Ashley found justice, we want to believe we can too." A mother in Carson City, "My son's case was closed in 1981. Please look at it again." A retired officer from Winnemucca wrote, "There's one case I've never been able to let go. I've kept the file for 20 years. Can you take a look?" Maya formed a small dedicated team, 3 investigators, and 1 genetic genealogy expert, to accept cases directly from the public. Someone joked, "You're about to become the guardian of forgotten files." Maya smiled, "If that's what Ashley left us, I'm ready." Sparks in 2022 no longer looks like the Sparks of 1986. Now no case is considered hopeless, no piece of evidence is left to rot in storage, no child witness is questioned the wrong way, no innocent person is rushed into the crosshairs. Ashley's legacy is not a monument, a garden, or an executive order. It is the quiet but powerful change in how a community faces the truth. On the white gravel path through the memorial garden, people say that on certain afternoons, you can almost picture the silhouette of a little girl with a pink backpack running with the desert wind, as if Ashley had finally been brought home. And that is the most beautiful legacy the little girl left behind, a better Nevada, fairer, and one that will never again forget a single child. The Ashley Monroe case, after closing at the 2022 Washoe County trial, and opening a new chapter with the Cold Case Reform Program, quickly spread beyond Nevada's borders. Within weeks, national media covered the story from every angle: forensic investigation, historical mistakes, the justice system, and the power of genetic genealogy. From CNN, ABC, and NBC, to the biggest true crime podcasts, everyone devoted episodes to dissecting the case. Some standout headlines: 36 years of silence, broken by science, wrong man, wrong decade, the failure that cost Nevada 14 years, Ashley Monroe, the case that changed Sparks forever. Reporters flooded Sparks, talking to residents, walking the route Ashley took, interviewing former teachers, neighbors, even retired officers. But the biggest shockwave wasn't the capture of a killer. After more than 3 decades, it was the explosion of debate about wrongful convictions in the American justice system. Charles Hartley's story, the man wrongly convicted and imprisoned for 14 years, became the focus of countless editorials. Legal experts asked, how could improperly guided child testimony be strong enough to convict someone? Why was critical evidence like the red soil sample lost for nearly 10 years? Why was there no mechanism to review cases once DNA technology emerged in the early 2000s? A Stanford law professor said on PBS, "The Ashley Monroe case isn't just personal tragedy. It's a textbook example of how fragile justice becomes when investigative procedures aren't standardized." The Nevada legislature even began discussing a bill requiring periodic review of all pre-modern DNA convictions. Ashley's story became the spark for a larger conversation about the justice system's accountability, and about human forgiveness. On the last Sunday in September, Sparks held a memorial for Ashley at the newly renamed Ashley Monroe Reflection Garden. More than 1,500 people attended, the largest community gathering the town had ever seen. The garden was lit by 400 candles, one for each still unsolved missing child case in Nevada. Maya Hernandez, Helen Garvey, young officers, Ashley's old teachers, the Hartley family, and Sparks residents stood side by side, no longer any distance between the grieving and the wrongly accused. When Laura Monroe walked onto the small stage in the middle of the garden, the desert wind gently moved through the newly planted trees. She looked at the paper in her hands, then folded it and put it away. She wouldn't read the prepared speech. Laura said only one sentence, low and steady. Justice came late. But it came. The whole garden fell silent. Then one by one, people bowed their heads, acknowledging the weight of 36 years of waiting, and saying a final goodbye to the 9-year-old girl they couldn't save. After the memorial, hundreds of residents walked the route Ashley took in 1986, from Maple Alley, past the little park, along the canal, toward the elementary school she never reached that final morning. The young officers, trained under the new program, walked at the back of the group as a promise that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. A little girl holding her mother's hand looked up and asked, "Mom, is this road still dangerous?" The mother answered, eyes wet, "No, sweetie, because now the whole town is watching it." The image of that road, golden streetlights stretching into the distance, gentle footsteps, hands held tight, became the new symbol of Sparks. Not a symbol of fear, not a symbol of a horrific crime, but a symbol of community responsibility. The responsibility to protect children, to fix mistakes, to never turn away from the truth, no matter how late it arrives. In the Nevada desert wind, people say that if you listen long enough, you can almost hear the sound of Ashley's small footsteps running down the old road, not in pain anymore, but in peace. The story of Ashley Monroe in Sparks, Nevada touches American life today, because it is not just one case. It is a mirror showing how we protect children, how we trust systems, and how we treat one another in community. A 9-year-old girl walking to school, on a familiar route, but vanishing forever, that can still happen in any town, from Nevada to Texas or Ohio. The way police in 1986 so quickly zeroed in on Charles Hartley, based on improper child testimony, and a backpack that wasn't even Ashley's, shows how dangerous tunnel vision can be. When we desperately want an answer right now, we easily pick the person who fits our mental picture of a killer instead of patiently following the evidence. The result was an innocent man spending 14 years behind bars, while Louis Daltonfield remained free, even returning to Sparks multiple times with Ashley's route circled in red on a map in his bag. The persistence of people like Laura, like Detective Maya Hernandez, along with new tools like genetic genealogy and 3D modeling, teach another lesson: justice can come late, but it only comes if there are people who refuse to give up, and are willing to admit when they were wrong. The Nevada Child Cold Case Initiative, Ashley's Memorial Garden, and the community walk back down the school route are real reminders for Americans today. Protecting kids isn't just the police's job, it's the job of neighbors, parents, teachers, bus drivers, anyone who sees something not quite right on a familiar street. The most important lesson isn't be afraid, but stay alert, dare to ask questions, dare to demand more transparency from the system, and dare to accept that sometimes we got it wrong. As Laura said, justice came late, but it came. Justice doesn't arrive on its own. It is built by people willing to face the truth, even when the truth hurts. If you value the journey to find justice for Ashley Monroe, and for forgotten victims, please subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling the stories that need to be told. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, where we continue shining light on cases everyone thought were lost forever in the dark.